Hi there, and welcome to this year's English Literature welcome session for Woking College. My name's Thomas Wheeler, and I'm the head of the English department here. You can contact me at any time about anything in this video or anything at my email address there, twh@woking.ac.uk. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a short look through a couple of key issues and ideas raised by one of our core texts, and I think are quite relevant to a kind of modern audience and our period now. What we're going to do is I'm going to give you a brief course introduction, so what the course is like overall. I'm going to go through some key concepts for this session. I'm going to give you some analytical tasks to do. There's some text on the screen, so make sure to be pausing the video at the right points when I ask you to, so you can actually spend some time with the text. If you want to as well, this is a free, the text we'll be using is available for free online, so by Googling it up, and you should be able to get these extracts there for free as well. We'll be doing some evaluation of those tasks at the end, and then at the end of the session, there'll be an opportunity for you to, again, I'll put my email address up in case you have any further questions that you want to ask. Okay, so as I said, we're going to start with a short introduction to what the course is like overall. And as a quick update, this session is going to be focusing on one of our course texts, the Duchess of Malfi. But I'm interested in terms of a modern audience that we are often seeing, especially in the news quite recently, been lots of stories about kind of political corruption and anger directed towards governments around the world in their handling of various issues. So we're going to have a look at how that kind of plays out in this play, The Duchess of Malfi, today. Okay, so the course structure, we are on Edexcel, the exam board, and that course follows 3 exams and 1 coursework piece. Your 3 exams are worth most of your grade here. They're worth 80%. And the coursework then obviously the remaining 20%. The first exam takes part in 2 questions. One of them is on Hamlet, so Shakespeare, that's your Shakespeare play for the year. Everyone does a Shakespeare. And you've also got the other revenge tragedy at the same time, similar time period, a little bit later, but similar time period, the Duchess of Malfi that we're looking at today. The second exam is a prose exam, so it's a novel-based course for that section, and that is looking at 2 texts. One of them being the more contemporary A Thousand Splendid Suns, and the other being Wuthering Heights. So those are compared around themes around women's experiences. The third exam is a poetry paper, and that is 2 separate anthologies of text. One of those is a modern anthology of text, so post-2000, and those are compared to an unseen text in the exam. And the other anthology is a romantic anthology. So this is poetry from an earlier period, so late 18th, early 19th century poetry, and that one is its own separate question as well. So those are your 3 exams. That, as I said, will be 80% of your grade. The coursework, which is 20%, is a singular essay composing of a collection, comparing a collection of World War I poetry to a novel set in the same time period. Okay, so that is the course. What we're going to look at today, as I said, is the Duchess of Malfi, and we're going to be looking at 2 particular literary techniques. These are your key concepts for the session. So we're going to be looking at metaphor and allegory. Now, these 2 techniques are probably ones that you've come across at GCSE. Metaphor certainly will be. Allegory may be something that you've touched on, depending on the text that you studied at that level, and depending on where you've looked at in terms of the course and what you've been doing. I've given examples here. These obviously at any point, guys, you can stop this video, just pause it and just see what you're getting up to, and obviously if you need to pause it here so you can go over these terms, get them down, that's absolutely fine. Okay, so these 2 terms, a metaphor, so this is quite a common usage, and you'll find that you'll use metaphors in everyday speech much more than you actually think about it. I think metaphor is, and figurative language in general is such a part of the English language that you'd be surprised how much of it is metaphorical. So the key idea, obviously, of a metaphor is where a figurative term where a word or phrase or object is used to represent another concept. So it's essentially implicitly comparative, but not explicitly comparative in the same way that a simile would be. Okay, so as an example here, I've used the example of a family tree. Now, this is a well-known phrase. We all use family trees probably quite regularly, and several websites, in fact, dedicated to the idea of a family tree. But obviously, this is a metaphor. Your family is not a tree. You are not part of a tree. So this obviously is comparing this idea of a family lineage, adopting through generations, to the kind of physical structure of a family tree. So it's a visual, and actually what you'll find, guys, is that if you look at a visual depiction of these things, these have often been depicted literally as trees. Allegory is a short narrative often. Sometimes it can be a full text-length narrative as well, in the case example I've given here. But it's a story whose narrative can be interpreted, so the actual structure of the story is interpreted to reveal an kind of an intended hidden meaning. These are often moral or political meanings. You'll find that Bible tales are often allegorical and other such things. Okay, so for example here, George Orwell, his Animal Farm is an allegory for the Russian Revolution, subsequent Communist Party rule in Russia. Okay, so those are the two concepts, and each of these concepts, guys, are going to be addressed in 2 subsequent videos, which, as I said, we're going to be looking at in a second. So the first of these, well, as I said, let's actually, before we get to that, let's have an introduction to the play. So the Duchess of Malfi is a tragedy. It's a revenge tragedy set in an Italian royal court. Now, the reason why it's Italian setting is partly because that's a story on which it was based, but also partly because some of the criticisms of society that Webster makes in the play wouldn't have been acceptable had he set it in an English setting. So he needs to set it in a foreign setting to kind of avoid any kind of repercussions from the government at this time. Well, not the government, but the monarchy at this time period. The Duchess, so the story revolves around the Duchess herself. She is a title figure. She is a kind of beautiful young widow, living her life, has just lost her husband, and she wants to have a new relationship with her head servant, Antonia. Now, this is a huge subversion of kind of class structures and positions at the time. She wants to pursue this kind of forbidden love that she has with her noble and generous-spirited Antonio, who is a good man, perhaps in a class below maybe even where he could and should be, given his inherent qualities. So the play will explore these kind of issues around class and worthiness anyhow, and especially because her corrupt brothers forbid her from marrying. They say that, you absolutely do not do that, and they try and keep her single, because if they do that, they will benefit from her wealth, alongside perhaps maintaining their own political prestige as well. If she were to marry again, she may lose some power and position. So she goes ahead with this marriage anyway. She ignores her brothers, and the rest of the play then is an attempt to keep her love secret and hidden from her kind of more villainous siblings. Okay, so the play is set in the time, obviously it's written in the time period of James I, of what we call the Jacobean era. Yeah, it's written about 1614. But it's set in an older period in Italy, but that's realistically kind of almost just window dressing. The play kind of deals with lots of issues of the political corruption of the time period, and I think this is the key thing, and this is why I thought this was such a, just dominated the news. Even the news, even up to this week, there's been kind of new revelations about kind of anger towards corrupt officials and in various countries around the world. So many criticisms were raised around the king's tendency to reward his personal followers and his friends excessively. And, good political advisors were often replaced with those who would perhaps just support or go along with the king. So this was a real issue for the time period. And these accusations, although often, some of them being perhaps true for James I, were actually also founded on earlier events under Queen Elizabeth, the previous monarch. And the notable execution of the Earl of Essex was a kind of particularly powerful event that kind of showed off the particularly kind of changeable and kind of perhaps ill-balanced and ill-judged nature of some of the decisions of the royal court of the time. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at a couple of extracts from the play. The first of these is the opening speech of the play. So you can pause this in a second. I'm going to give you a quick overview and then I'm going to tell you to pause. I want you to obviously zoom in on this, read it. If you want to go and find it online, you can. And I'll quickly go through the questions here. So this is the opening speech. Antonio, the previously mentioned lovely head steward, has come back from France, where he's been staying with the French king in his court, and he's learnt lots of lessons about this lovely place. So he comes back and he's talking to his good friend Delio, and they basically have a chat about what he thought was good about the French court. So questions here are: what does Antonio admire about the French court? How does this change our interpretation of the Italian court? What metaphor does he use to represent the threat of political corruption, and what does that metaphor imply? And then how should we view Antonio's morals? And also, how should we view, what does the arrival of Basola, who he describes quite negatively at the end here, suggest? I've given you some definitions of some key terms there that you might struggle with. You might not. I just figured that those were some that perhaps often make this a little bit confusing. So yeah, if you can pause here, that'd be excellent. I would spend as long as you need to annotate and evaluate this text, and then let's go and have a watch of it. So hopefully you're done reading that now. What we're going to do is we're going to have a quick watch of this scene. I want you to pay attention to A, how friendly they are, and also the fact that they skip a little bit of the text here. And I've highlighted the kind of key metaphor for the scene here, which is this idea highlighted in yellow on the side of your video.
You are welcome to your country, dear Antonio. You've been long in France, and you return a very formal Frenchman in your habit. How do you like the French court?
I admire it. In seeking to restore both state and people to a fixed order, their judicious king begins at home, quits first his royal palace of flattering sycophants, of dissolute and infamous persons, which he sweetly terms his master's masterpiece, the work of heaven, considering duly that a prince's court is like a common fountain, whence should flow pure silver drops in general, but if it chance some cursed example poison it near the head, death and diseases through the whole land spread. Here comes Bossela, the only court Gaul, yet I observe his railing is not for simple love of piety. Indeed, he rails at those things which he wants, would be as lecherous, covetous, or proud, bloody or envious as any man, if he had means to be so. Here's the cardinal.
Okay, so hopefully that was a nice bit of context for that scene, give it a bit more kind of life and vitality there. So yeah, there's a couple of metaphors used in there describing Basola as the court girl, and there's the extension of the initial simile of the French court, comparing it to a fountain, and this is extended into an extended metaphor that runs through the rest of that scene, and it gives us a nice way of looking at how political corruption can spread through the country. I'll let you come to your own conclusions on that one, but we'll talk about that at the end. Okay, so moving on then to our next section of the play. We're jumping to a later point in the play now, where the Duchess gives she gives a small allegory here. She gives us a small tale which goes through and kind of highlights some more issues of corruption. So she talks about this dogfish and salmon having a conversation here. And at first it might seem a little bit kind of abstract, but hopefully by the time you get to the end of this speech, it becomes quite straightforward as to what she's getting at, the point she's making here. Bearing in mind a salmon obviously coming from the river, swimming into the sea to meet this dogfish, a small shark that swims around in the ocean. So the questions I've asked you here are: what is the allegory that Duchess is telling? What is the meaning of the story? How does this speech play with some language and make the story humorous? And how does that reinforce perhaps the message of the text itself? And what do you think the final line suggests? Why do you think she becomes so literal with her message at the end there? Okay, so again, pause this video, take the text. You can search this up if you go onto Google, if you want a kind of bigger version of this text, then you can just search the Duchess of Malfi salmon tale, and that will take it right up for you. Okay, so pause the video. Okay, so hopefully that was a useful time there to engage with the video. What we're now going to do is, like we did for the previous one, we are going to quickly watch a clip from this from a different production now. So I've tried to show you a couple of different productions, and in this one what we're going to be having a look at is a more contemporary set production. In fact, this production we watched this last year with our current students. We went to see this at the Almeida Theatre in London, and it was a really, really good production. Hopefully it will be available for us all soon on the kind of now improving digital theatres. But this is an excellent production. Just have a look at this short clip.
I prithee, who is greatest? Can you tell? Sad tales befit my woe, I'll tell you one. A salmon, as she swam unto the sea, met with a dogfish, who encounters her with this rough language: why art thou so bold to mix thyself with our high state of floods, being no eminent courtier, but one that for the calmest and fresh time of the year does live in shallow rivers? Ranks thyself with silly smelts and shrimps, and darest thou pass by our dog ship without reverence? Oh, quoth the salmon, sister, be at peace. Thank Jupiter we both have passed the net. Our value never can be truly known, till in the fisher's basket we be shown. In the market then my price may be the higher, even when I am nearest to the cooking fire. So to great men the moral may be stretched. Men oft are valued high when they're most wretched.
So quite a powerful ending to that one there, really heightening the kind of point she's making there, that great men perhaps are most often the worst men in society there. And that's the argument perhaps being made by the Duchess here. Herself someone of greatness and nobility, but perhaps of a different attitude towards the others. So in kind of summary and stuff then, guys, to get to the evaluation part of this, from these two extracts, I think maybe what is the argument that Webster is making about the nature of corruption in society? Where does corruption come from? In his fountain metaphor, he says if someone poisoned it near the head of a fountain, so think about comparing society to a fountain as that metaphor, who would be at the head of the fountain, the top of the fountain? You can probably get that. Quite straightforward there, hopefully. And then the other one, a little bit, obviously kind of extending it further with the Duchess's analogy here to the salmon. Have a look really at how she's kind of comparing great men, and by great men, what she means here, she doesn't mean people who are like great, like they're a great guy. What she means is greatness in terms of position and status and power. So that's the kind of initial question, but then I want you to take this further. How could this be framed? If you were putting on a production of this play, how would you frame this for a modern day audience? What kind of context and setting would you use? Would you perhaps take it out of its original setting and put it into a more modern one, or not? And finally, I suppose, given that this is a tragedy, what do you think is likely to happen to the two characters here, Antonio and the Duchess, the protagonists of this tragedy? What do you think is likely to happen to these characters who are speaking out against the corruption of their time? Okay, if you want to go really into this as well, today it's even further than these questions here. The play is available online, as I said. There should be plenty of versions that you can read as digital texts, so that would be a really good chance for you to engage with this text fully. Okay, if you have any questions about any of this, or you want to push this further, follow up with some ideas in the text, or anything else that you need or want, please get in touch with me via my email address. As I said, I mentioned it at the start, but here it is again, twh@working.ac.uk. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really hope you enjoyed this and got a good chance to look at some of the course text and course ideas, and we'll be delighted to see you soon. Thank you very much.